So, was Oppenheimer, as Nolan says, the most important figure of the 20th century? I'm inclined to think that's an overstatement. For one thing, he wasn't the most important scientist of the 20th century. Albert Einstein was more important, so was Paul Dirac, so was Werner Heisenberg. There are any number of scientists who made more important and fundamental contributions to science than Oppenheimer did. So what is his claim to be the most important person or most important figure of the 20th century? Well, he directed the laboratory that produced the atom bomb. But a number of things I'd say about that. He wasn't in charge of the Manhattan Project as a whole. That was General Groves, who arguably was more instrumental than Oppenheimer in getting the bomb done, because Groves not only set up the laboratory at Los Alamos, he also set up the plant at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and the one at Hanwell in Washington State to enrich uranium, and that was an enormous undertaking, and also to produce plutonium. So arguably Groves had a greater role than Oppenheimer. He could discuss anybody's specialism at their depth, and so whether you're working on the chemistry of uranium or the design of the trigger mechanism for the bomb, or even whether you were, going to Oppenheimer to discuss the day-to-day arrangements of the town of Los Alamos, whatever it was, everybody who's published their memoirs of Los Alamos says that Oppenheimer was a great listener. He ranged over every conceivable problem, and he understood the problems immediately and could deal with the solutions. And then with regard to affecting the culture as a whole, I mean, if you ask me who was the most important figure of the 20th century, I'd be tempted to say Alan Turing, because after all, Turing was the first person to break down what would normally be a non-computable task into a computer task, and thereby make the digitization possible of an enormous range of things. And that, I think, has had an enormous influence on our society. He had no doubt that it was his moral responsibility to do whatever he could to build the atom bomb, because he knew that Werner Heisenberg was leading the Nazi project to build a bomb, and he thought it was important for the whole world that the Allies produced a bomb before the Nazis did. And that was the argument he used to get all these brilliant people to Los Alamos. And he had no doubt, no qualms at all about that. And even when it turned out that the Nazis didn't get very far at all in building their bomb, and they surrendered before it was, before the Allies could use the atomic bomb on them, and then it shifted to using the bomb against the Japanese. Even then, Oppenheimer had no qualms. He was asked many times whether he regretted developing the bomb that was used to destroy Hiroshima, and he was never tempted to say that he regretted it. And Oppenheimer's view, when the project, when it was being discussed, should the United States have an accelerated program to produce the hydrogen bomb, his view was no, because it's so powerful that nobody in their right mind would ever use it. And given that nobody would ever use it, what is the point in producing it? And I think he made himself very unpopular with the powers that be in Washington, D.C. for pushing that line. And I think that was one of the things that persuaded the authorities that he couldn't be trusted and to take his security clearance away from him. I mean, his friend Isidore Rabi thought that if Oppenheimer had stuck to the Jewish tradition in which he was brought up, he would have been a different kind of physicist. That is to say, he wouldn't have been so content to accept the mysterious. He would have always wanted to explain the mystery. It's a feature of Oppenheimer's personality and of his physics that he was content to say, well, look, reality is just mysterious. He was known to everybody as a German Jew. He always insisted that he was neither German nor Jewish. But he certainly came from that German Jewish enclave of Manhattan. His parents were very wealthy. His father earned a very good living owning a tailoring business. And they lived in Riverside Drive, which is a very ritzy area in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And his parents certainly were part of that Upper West Side Jewish community. And they sent Oppenheimer to the ethical culture school in the Upper West Side, where almost all the pupils would have been from that Jewish community. But Oppenheimer never felt himself to be Jewish, and rather reacted against people trying to label him as Jewish. In the 1930s, with the rise of Nazism and the persecution of Jews in Germany, that is the moment when Oppenheimer began to some extent to identify himself with the Jews and with his own family. He did whatever he could to rescue members of his family from Nazi Germany and also to rescue Jewish scientists from that Nazi Germany. So to that extent, he identified with his culture, but not to the extent of regarding himself as Jewish. But I certainly think his relationships with both Jean Tatlock and Kitty had an influence on his political life. Jean Tatlock was a member of the Communist Party. She'd had previous husbands, one of whom was a Communist Party union organizer. And it was Jean Tatlock that brought him largely into the orbit of the Communist Party and Communist Party sympathizers on the west coast of America. So Jean had a great influence in that respect. And then Kitty preserved that because Kitty too was a member of the Communist Party.